I never thought I'd spend my last days in a hospice. Not with all the money in the world sitting quietly under my name, not with a penthouse in Manhattan that most men would kill for, not with doctors and nurses on my payroll who would have gladly turned my home into a private clinic. But I couldn't do that. I didn't want my daughters to remember me surrounded by cold machines, hidden behind heavy curtains in the house where they once played hide-and-seek. I didn't want their last image of me to be a dying man trying to hold on to his empire with trembling hands. So here I am. A VIP ward, yes, big window, polished floor, a leather armchair across from my bed. There are paintings on the walls that some committee of decorators thought would suit the rich while they fade away. The nurses are kind, always smiling, though their eyes carry the truth. Everyone in this place is on borrowed time. Some have weeks, some months. I have 2 months, give or take. 59 years, and it feels both like a blink and a punishment. People often assume I was born with a silver spoon in my mouth. It's the easiest story to tell about the rich. He must have had everything handed to him. In reality, I was the oddball, the reject, the one my parents laughed at across the dinner table. He's not clever enough, my father once said when I asked why everyone else got to apply to college but me. My brothers went to law school and medical school. My sister majored in economics. Me. They thought I'd end up pumping gas or selling newspapers. But I was stubborn. God, I was stubborn. I locked myself in the library, studied until my eyes burned, applied in secret, and when the acceptance letter from an Ivy League school arrived, I didn't show it to my parents. I just packed my bag and left. I didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me beg. I built my life out of spite. Every brick of my business empire was laid with the fuel of their doubt. And when the skyscraper of my success finally rose above the skyline, when my name appeared in the financial magazines, when my penthouse was the kind of address that brokers whispered like a prayer, only then did they come back. I still remember the knock on the door. My father's voice trembling on the threshold. They needed money, a lot of it, to cover a family loan that was about to destroy them. For a second, I thought about slamming the door in their faces. But I didn't. I gave them the money. Only with one condition, that they never contact me again. I thought it was poetic justice. They had ignored me all my life, and now I returned the favor, only with a check in their hands. Even then, I saw it in their eyes, they still thought I was a fraud. That my fortune wasn't earned but stolen. Funny thing about money. It buys silence. It doesn't buy love. Somewhere along the way, I convinced myself that a family of my own would fix the hole in my chest. I met a woman, beautiful in a way that made people turn their heads when she entered a room. I fell fast, reckless, like a teenager, and after a few dates I asked her to marry me. We had 2 daughters, Christine and Ninel. 2 perfect girls who became the center of my world. But here's the irony, while I was busy conquering markets, signing contracts, and counting zeros, I didn't see what was happening under my own roof. My wife was cheating on me. The proof arrived in a plain envelope, photographs spread across my desk like knives. A stranger, still faceless to me, had decided to blackmail me. And I, the so-called genius of strategy, had been blind in my own home. I didn't confront her. Not immediately. Instead, I made a plan. A cruel, meticulous plan to remind her who I was, what I was capable of. But before I could pull the trigger, she ran away with her lover. To Canada, of all places. People say betrayal feels like fire in the chest. To me, it was ice. Cold, numbing, spreading into my veins until I couldn't feel anything at all. She left the girls behind, and I became both father and mother, though truthfully, the nannies did most of the heavy lifting. Christine was 10 at the time, Ninel only 8. I told them their mother had gone to find herself. I don't know if they believed me. Years later, when I had built walls so high I thought no one could climb them, I met someone. Not in a gala, not at a charity auction, not through the endless circle of socialites who always smiled too wide at me. No, it happened on a random Tuesday morning, at the glass entrance of my own company. She was late, rushing, coffee in hand, and when the revolving door jammed, the cup slipped. Scalding liquid splashed across my suit. She froze, horrified, mumbling apologies. I should have barked at her, had her written up by HR. Instead, I asked her name. Then I asked her to dinner. She didn't know who I was. That was the first miracle. That night we laughed about childhood stories, traded small-town secrets, talked about the smell of summer rain and how cartoons used to be better when we were kids. She was the first woman who looked at me and saw a man, not a bank account. Her family welcomed me like I belonged. I helped them quietly, fixing up their old house, arranging business connections for her father without taking credit. For the first time, I felt human again. But secrets don't stay buried. One evening, I told her the truth, that I was the head of the company she worked for, that the man she spilled coffee on wasn't just another employee but the owner. I expected her to laugh, to forgive me for the omission. Instead, she disappeared. She hated lies. And in her eyes, my silence had been the worst lie of all. I tried to find her. God, how I tried. For weeks I sent messages, left voicemails, even drove out to her neighborhood like a fool who'd lost his compass. But she was gone, vanished into the folds of the city as if New York itself had swallowed her whole. The only proof she had ever existed was the faint smell of her perfume on my coat and the laughter of my daughters when they asked if she would come to dinner again. My girls adored her. Christine, the cautious one, watched her with the eyes of someone who'd been hurt already, someone who knew what abandonment felt like. Ninel, younger and brighter, ran to her with the recklessness only children can afford. For a short time, our apartment had been full of warmth, the kind of warmth money couldn't buy. She had braided Ninel's hair, listened to Christine's piano practice, told them silly stories about her dog growing up. And then, just like that, she was gone. I kept myself busy, as men like me always do. I drowned the loss in contracts, meetings, and the noise of success. To the outside world, I was still the untouchable tycoon with the golden touch. Inside, I was a man checking his phone every hour for a message that never came. Years passed. Enough years for me to almost convince myself I had imagined her. Enough for my daughters to stop asking about her. Then came the diagnosis. It was a Tuesday morning when the doctor walked into my office, the same office where I had signed billion-dollar deals and watched empires rise and fall. He didn't waste time. He placed the scans on the table, cleared his throat, and told me what men like me never want to hear: there was nothing they could do. Surgery would be useless. Treatment would only delay the inevitable. Best estimate, 6 months. I remember looking at him and thinking, does he know who I am? As if wealth or reputation could bargain with biology. But death doesn't negotiate. Not for kings, not for beggars, and certainly not for arrogant men who thought they had outsmarted the world. I walked out of that hospital and into a different life. For the first time, the skyscrapers didn't look tall. They looked fragile, like toys stacked by a careless child. I walked past people rushing to work, holding coffees, checking their watches, and wondered how many of them realized that one day all of it, their deadlines, their meetings, their anxieties, would vanish into dust. That night, I sat with my daughters. Christine was 16 by then, already showing signs of the woman she would become, sharp, observant, unwilling to be fooled. Ninel was 14, still caught between childhood and whatever comes after. They were laughing at some TV show, throwing popcorn at each other, their voices filling the room. And I thought, what will happen to them when I'm gone? I had enough money to secure their futures 10 times over. Nannies, tutors, lawyers, all of that was easy. But what about love? What about the warmth that even I, with all my billions, couldn't seem to hold on to? That was the night I made a decision. I picked up my phone. Her number was still there, buried under the others. My finger hovered over the screen. I wanted to hear her voice, to tell her everything, the diagnosis, the truth, the fear. To ask her to come back, not for me, but for my daughters who needed a mother. And then I put the phone down. Because love asks for honesty, and I no longer had honesty to give. If I told her the truth, she would stay. She would marry me. She would walk into this storm and hold my hand until the end. And then what? She would be left a widow, her life defined by a man who had stolen her future along with her heart. No. I couldn't do that to her. So I lied. I called her one last time and said the only thing I thought could set her free. That I didn't love her anymore. That I had never really loved her. Silence on the other end. Then the softest whisper, I knew it. The line went dead. That was 2 years ago. Now, as I lie in this hospice bed, I replay that moment 1,000 times. My lie was meant to protect her, but in truth, it was the most selfish act of all. I was afraid, not of death, but of leaving behind a woman who might mourn me for the rest of her life. I thought I was sparing her. In reality, I was sparing myself the pain of watching her suffer. The days here blur together. The nurses come and go, adjusting tubes, checking charts, smiling with practiced kindness. The view outside my window never changes, taxis crawling down the avenue, the Hudson River glinting in the distance, the city carrying on without me. But then, 2 weeks ago, something changed. Christine came into my room, her phone clutched in her hand, her face pale. She didn't say much, just sat on the edge of the bed, looked at me for a long moment, and whispered, "She deserves to know." I didn't ask who. I already knew. The next morning, there was a knock at the door. A hesitant knock, as if the person on the other side wasn't sure they should be there. My heart stuttered in my chest. When the door opened, I saw her standing there, framed by the sterile hallway light. The woman I had loved, the woman I had lied to, the woman I thought I had lost forever. And just like that, the air in the hospice ward changed. At first, I thought it was a dream. She stood in the doorway like time hadn't passed, though of course it had. Her hair was longer, darker around the edges, her face a little sharper, but her eyes were the same. Wide, cautious, carrying that light I had memorized in another lifetime. I couldn't speak. My throat locked, my body felt suddenly friendlier than it had 5 minutes before. All I could do was stare at her and remember the night I told her I didn't love her anymore. That night had replayed in my head every evening before sleep, but seeing her now made it unbearable. "Hi," she said, her voice soft, almost hesitant. It was such an ordinary word, yet it cracked me open. Christine had been hovering near the door. She gave me a quick look, sharp, determined, and then she left us alone. My daughter, my little soldier. She had called her. She had done what I couldn't. "I shouldn't be here," the woman whispered, stepping inside. Her hands twisted together, nervous. "But Christine called me." She said. She stopped, her gaze flicking to the 4 line beside my bed. I saw the realization hit her like a slow punch. "Yes," I said, my voice gravel. "She told you the truth." For a moment, we just looked at each other. The silence between us wasn't empty, it was crowded. Crowded with everything we had been, everything we could have been, and everything I had destroyed with one phone call. "Why didn't you tell me?" she finally asked. Her voice cracked on the last word. Why lie? The answer had lived in my chest for 2 years, festering like a wound. Now it spilled out. Because I didn't want to make you a widow. I thought if I pushed you away, you'd find someone else. Someone healthy. Someone who could give you the years I can't. Her eyes filled, though she tried to blink it back. "You idiot," she whispered. "You absolute idiot." And then she crossed the room and sat beside me. Not close enough to touch, not yet, but near enough that I could smell her perfume again. My chest ached, not from the illness, but from memory. We talked. Slowly, cautiously, as if relearning each other's language. She told me about the years after she left, how she buried herself in work, how she tried dating but could never shake the feeling of unfinished business. I told her about the girls, how Christine had grown into a fierce young woman and how Ninel still carried that reckless joy in her step. At some point, the nurse peeked in and froze at the sight of her, clearly recognizing the shift in the room. There was no medical note for what was happening here, no chart box for love returned. The nurse only smiled faintly and backed out. Later that evening, when the girls came in, something extraordinary happened. Ninel flew to her, wrapping arms around her waist like she had been waiting all her life for this moment. Christine hung back, studying her with that careful, critical eye of hers, then gave the smallest nod. Acceptance. Permission. For the first time in years, the four of us sat together. Not a fractured family, not a man with hired caretakers, but something closer to whole. I should have felt peace. And part of me did. But beneath it all ran a current of fear. Because I knew the truth, I didn't have much time left. The doctors had been clear. Weeks, maybe months. And here she was, back in my life, back in the lives of my daughters, just when they would need her most. It was both a miracle and a cruelty. That night, after the girls had gone to sleep and the hospice halls were quiet, she stayed. She sat in the leather armchair across from my bed, refusing to leave. "You need rest," I told her. "So do you," she said. I wanted to reach for her hand, but I didn't. My body ached, but my guilt ached more. I had stolen years from her. And now I was asking her, without saying a word, to give me her last months. There is a kind of intimacy that comes when words fall away. The soft hum of machines, the faint buzz of the city outside, the rhythm of two people breathing in the same space after years apart. At one point, I drifted off. When I woke, she was still there, her head leaned back against the chair, eyes closed, lips parted in sleep. For a fleeting moment, I allowed myself to imagine a different life. A life where I hadn't lied, where I had let her stay, where she had walked beside me not only through joy but through sickness too. But reality doesn't bend for fantasies. And as I watched her sleeping, I realized something. The real question wasn't whether she would stay. It was whether I deserved to let her. The body has a way of keeping score, even when the mind tries to pretend. At first, it was small things, a tremor in my hand, a stumble when I tried to stand. The nurses whispered about dosage, about adjustments, about comfort care. I hated that phrase. Comfort care. As if I were a child being tucked into bed with a warm blanket instead of a man with half the city under his thumb. But then the small things became bigger. My lungs burned after a few words, my ribs ached with every cough, and my vision blurred until faces became outlines. I could feel my empire shrinking with me. My businesses still hummed in the background, but I no longer had the strength to pretend I was at the helm. The truth was simple, my reign was ending. She saw it before anyone else. One morning, I woke to find her reading to Ninel at the foot of my bed. Something about the sight tore me open. My daughter's head was resting on her shoulder, her laughter soft and safe. Christine hovered nearby, pretending not to watch but drinking in every word. When our eyes met, hers carried both tenderness and steel. She wasn't here out of pity. She wasn't here to collect some imagined inheritance. She was here because she had chosen to be, even after the lie, even after the years. That terrified me more than the disease itself. Because now I had something to lose again. That night, I called my lawyer. He came to the hospice, briefcase in hand, his suit pressed as though he were meeting me in my penthouse instead of this sterile ward. I told him what I wanted, everything to my daughters, and to her. Not divided, not contested. A clean line of inheritance. He raised an eyebrow. Are you certain? Yes. My voice cracked, but not from weakness. She's the only one who can keep them safe. Money can buy nannies and tutors, but not a mother. He scribbled notes, adjusted clauses, reminded me of tax implications. None of it mattered. The only thing that mattered was knowing that after I was gone, the girls wouldn't be alone. When she found out, she was furious. You can't just leave me all of this, she said, pacing the room like a storm. Do you know what it looks like? Do you know what people will say? That I came back for the money. That I stayed for the inheritance. They can say what they want, I rasped. The girls will know the truth. Her anger melted into something else, something that looked like grief. She knelt beside the bed, her hand finally finding mine. Her touch was warm, steady. You're not allowed to do this to me, she whispered. You're not allowed to die and make me carry your world. But of course, I was. There are no negotiations with death, no contracts that delay the inevitable. In the days that followed, my health slid downhill faster. The painkillers blurred the edges of everything. Time folded, mornings bled into nights, and conversations slipped through my fingers like sand. Sometimes I woke and saw her there, reading, laughing with the girls, or just sitting quietly. Sometimes I thought I dreamed her, that my guilt had conjured her as a final mercy. But then I'd feel her hand squeeze mine, firm and real, and I'd know she was no dream. One evening, Christine sat beside me after her sister had gone to bed. She had grown so much in these months, her face sharper, her eyes older than 16 should allow. Dad, she said quietly. I called her because I knew you wouldn't. I knew you'd be too proud, or too scared, or both. But you needed her. We all did. I tried to answer, but my throat tightened. She reached out, her small hand covering mine. You lied to her once, Christine continued. Don't lie again. Don't pretend you don't want her here. I looked at my daughter and realized she had already become the woman I always hoped she'd be, brave, honest, unwilling to settle for half-truths. The next morning, I told her everything. Every fear. Every mistake. Every selfish reason I had for pushing her away. I told her how much I loved her still, how much I had missed her, how every night I had replayed the sound of her laugh. And she cried, not the polite tears of someone showing sympathy, but the raw, gut-deep sobs of someone who had been carrying too much for too long. She buried her face in my chest, and I held her, as weak as I was, as if holding her could keep time from moving forward. The hospice halls are quiet at night. Too quiet. You hear things, footsteps that aren't there, whispers of other families behind closed doors, the low hum of machines that keep fading bodies alive. Lying there with her in my arms, I realized the strangest thing, I wasn't afraid anymore. For the first time since the diagnosis, I didn't dread the ticking clock. Because even if my time was ending, hers and the girls were still beginning. But fate wasn't done with me yet. Because 2 weeks later, a letter arrived. A letter that had been lost, forwarded, and rerouted through lawyers and accountants until it found me here, in this place of endings. And when I opened it, I saw a name I hadn't thought about in years. My father's. The envelope was thin, the kind that carries either bills or ghosts. The handwriting on the front was old-fashioned, shaky, but still familiar. I hadn't seen it in decades, yet my gut clenched the moment I recognized it. My father. I almost tore it up. I had promised myself I'd never let that man's words poison me again. But curiosity is a cruel master, and dying men don't have the luxury of ignoring final messages. So I opened it. The letter was dated months earlier. My father had already passed away. The ink bled in places, as though his hand had trembled over the page. Asterisk, you were always stronger than I gave you credit for. I told myself belittling you would make you tougher. The truth is, I was afraid. You weren't like the others, you thought differently, felt differently. I thought that meant you'd fail. Instead, it meant you'd succeed in ways I never could. I don't expect forgiveness. I only ask that you come home one last time. There are things you don't know, things I couldn't tell you when I was alive. I've left instructions with the lawyer in our town. It concerns you, your daughters, and the land that was never mine to keep. Asterisk. I read it twice, 3 times, until the words blurred. My first instinct was anger. After a lifetime of neglect, he wanted to play confessor from the grave. To leave riddles and mysteries like a final joke. But something in the phrasing gnawed at me. The land that was never mine to keep. What land? My family had owned nothing but debts and resentment. That night, I couldn't sleep. The machines hummed, the nurses padded in and out, and beside me she breathed softly, her hand curled over mine. Yet my mind was back in that small town, in the crumbling farmhouse where I had once sworn I'd never return. By morning, I had made a decision. I asked her to go. To leave the hospice for a few days and find the lawyer mentioned in the letter. She protested, furiously at first. She didn't want to leave me, not now, not with my body failing faster each week. But I told her this wasn't about me. It was about the girls. If there's something hidden, something that belongs to them, I said, they deserve to know. They deserve the truth I never got. Reluctantly, she agreed. For 3 days she was gone, and the hospice felt emptier than ever. Christine tried to fill the silence with her sharp questions and watchful eyes. Ninel filled it with music, humming and playing melodies on a cheap keyboard the nurses had brought her. But at night, when the lights dimmed, I lay awake with nothing but the weight of my father's words pressing down. On the 4th evening, she returned. Her face was pale, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched a folder. She didn't speak at first, just closed the door behind her and sat heavily in the chair by my bed. "What did you find?" I asked, my voice rough. She opened the folder and spread out documents, deeds, maps, letters. It turned out my father had been guarding a secret for decades. Land, rich farmland on the outskirts of our hometown, had been held in trust under his name, though it never truly belonged to him. It had been promised to someone else long before. Someone whose will had been ignored, buried under family pride and manipulation. And that someone was my grandfather. His will had named me, the so-called oddball, the reject, as the true heir. Not my brothers. Not my sister. Me. My father had hidden it, pretending ownership, using it as leverage, even mortgaging parts of it. And when debt collectors finally closed in, that was the loan I had unknowingly paid off years ago when they appeared at my penthouse door. The land was still mine by law. By right. By blood. And with it came an agribusiness that had been quietly thriving under tenants who thought they owed everything to my father. My head spun. All my life I had believed I was the outsider, the unwanted child who had clawed his way up with nothing but grit. And now, at the edge of my life, I learned I had been chosen all along. It felt less like justice and more like a cruel joke. What do I do with this? I asked her. She reached across the bed, her hand steady on mine. You do what you've been trying to do all along. You leave something for your daughters. Not just money, roots. A place where they can belong. Her words sank into me like medicine. For the first time, the inheritance I had obsessed over, the stocks, the accounts, the penthouse, felt small compared to this. Land. Soil. A legacy that couldn't be liquidated with a keystroke. That night, I signed the papers. I left the land, the farm, the business to my girls. Let them decide if they wanted to keep it, sell it, or turn it into something new. Let them know that beneath all the betrayals and lies, there had always been something solid waiting for them. But as I closed my eyes, I couldn't help but wonder, if my father had told me this sooner, would my life have been different? Would I have forgiven him? The truth came quietly, like a whisper. No. I had built myself in spite of him. And perhaps that was the greatest inheritance of all. Time ran differently in the hospice. Some days felt endless, like I was trapped in an hourglass where the sand fell too slowly. Others vanished in a blink, stolen by naps that turned into whole afternoons. My body was failing, but my mind remained sharp enough to understand one thing: the end was close. And strangely, I wasn't afraid anymore. She stayed with me, almost constantly now. Sometimes she read aloud to me or the girls. Sometimes she just sat quietly, her hand warm in mine, her eyes following the rise and fall of my breath as if willing me to stay a little longer. Christine studied for school at the little desk by the window, glancing up now and then, pretending she wasn't watching me. Ninel played her music, her small fingers dancing clumsily but joyfully across the keys. The ward, sterile and polished when I arrived, had turned into something else, a home. A temporary home, yes, but real. The painkillers grew stronger. The doctors shifted to morphine. My body became light, like paper, but my heart was heavier than ever. Heavier because of what I was leaving behind. One evening, I asked her to come close. She leaned in, brushing hair from her face, her eyes tired but soft. "I need you to promise me something," I whispered. She frowned. "Don't start with promises. Just tell me. When I'm gone, don't disappear. Don't let them feel what I felt. Don't let them think they're unworthy of love." Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. "I promise. But you have to promise me something too." "What?" "That you'll stop worrying about what happens after. That you'll let yourself rest when the time comes." I managed a smile. Bossy as ever. She laughed through the tears. That laugh, God, I wish I could bottle it and take it with me wherever I'm going. In the final week, I signed the last of the papers. My lawyer came again, his expression somber. The inheritance was secure, my daughters would have the penthouse, the businesses, and, most importantly, the farmland that had once been hidden from me. She would have enough to live without worry, enough to guide them, enough to ensure they were never left adrift. But still, I added one final clause, a donation. A significant part of my estate was to go directly to this hospice. To repair, to expand, to make it less of a place of endings and more of a place of peace. No one should die alone in cold white walls. The last night came quietly. I knew it when I woke that morning, my body too heavy, my breath too shallow. The nurses moved slower around me, their voices softer, as if they too could feel the clock winding down. She climbed into the bed beside me, carefully, gently, as though afraid I might break. I rested against her, my head on her shoulder, her heartbeat steady against my ear. Christine sat at the foot of the bed, holding my ankle with both hands like an anchor. Ninel curled beside me, her small hand resting over mine. For hours, we stayed that way. No words, just the kind of silence that holds more love than speech ever could. When my chest began to ache, when my breath grew ragged, I opened my eyes one last time and looked at her. "I love you," I whispered. The words I should have never denied her. The words I had buried beneath pride and fear. Her tears fell onto my face, warm and salty. "I love you too. Always have." And with that, I let go. They told me later, though of course, I only know it in the way the dead sometimes know things, that after the funeral, she kept her promise. She didn't disappear. She raised my daughters with patience and strength. She gave them a home, not just a house. She also kept my other promise. She donated part of the money to the hospice. They renovated the halls, expanded the children's wing, filled the place with color and warmth. Not just a waiting room for death, but a shelter for families clinging to their last days together. My name is on a plaque somewhere in the lobby, though that hardly matters. What matters is that Christine and Ninel can walk into that place years from now and know that their father, for all his mistakes, tried to leave the world a little softer than he found it. And maybe, just maybe, they'll remember that in the end, I didn't die alone. I died in their arms. And in hers.
Each of us has secrets, the kind we're ashamed to even remember. It's up to you to decide whether you dare to speak them aloud. But one day, each of us will have to find the courage to stand on the side of light and say goodbye to the ghosts of the past. I've already done it twice. Share your own experience with me in the comments. How often have you had to look the truth in the eye? Subscribe to my channel to get a new video story every day from my grandmother's diary. She worked for 10 years in an American hospice and recorded the final confessions of brave people. I've digitized it all, changed the names of the characters but kept their truth. Thank you for your attention.